Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to provide some tips on how to stuff a plush to be floppy, and I'm going to demonstrate with this plush right here, which is a prototype of a commission that I'm working on. Before we begin, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more plush making content. Let's get started. The first step is to select the right pattern. Not every plush has a design that can be floppy. It's important to choose or design the right pattern to get the amount of flop that you're looking for. Patterns that have short limbs and bodies will not have enough length to actually flop. You want to look for patterns that have natural points that can bend. For example, if you think of a quadruped pattern, this will be the top of the legs where they meet the body. Even if it's not perfectly anatomically correct, for a plush it will probably look okay. Let's look at another example. I would not try to make my standing anthro plush floppy. While the arms could probably be floppy and work just fine, the legs are not designed for this purpose. They begin high at the hips. For the legs to flop, they would have to bend around this area, which would look very strange from an anatomical perspective. If I tried to get it to bend at the hips instead, then the stomach would bend awkwardly. Either way, it would not be a good look. In addition, you also need to think about whether you're just interested in the plush holding a lying down pose or if you'd also like it to look good when sitting or standing. Consider how the limbs are patterned on the plush. If it holds a unique pose, it may not work well for a floppy plush. If you want your plush to both lay down and stand, a pattern with bent limbs will not be able to stand. You can see how the limbs look on my floppy plush, which is mainly just intended to lay down. I want the limbs to lay flat on the surface when it lays down, but when I lift it up, I wanted them to be able to fall down a little bit instead of being at a 90-degree angle. When I began patterning this plush, I had the limbs patterned at these hard angles, but it looked strange when the plush was lifted. Instead, I pointed the limbs downward a bit so that the plush's limbs would hang down more when lifted, but fall back into place when set down. If you want your plush to stand, sit, and lay down, you should follow a similar principle and pattern the legs at an angle where it can work for all positions. This may take some trial and error to get this right. The second step is to gather the right materials. Your fabric needs to be soft and pliable, like minky and fleece. Luxe Cuddle Minky is also especially good for floppy plush, as its structure handles floppiness well, and the fur-like texture hides the wrinkles that come from stuffing the plush lightly. You should not use a stiff fabric like felt. You will need to weight certain parts of your plush like the feet and the tail tip to help get a floppy effect. I like to use poly pellets for this. They are small plastic beads that you insert into the plush that's like what's inside a Beanie Baby. You can also use other things like glass beads or even rice, but I prefer not to use food in my plushies. You can stuff your plush with normal polyfill, but I highly prefer using special MOCHI stuffing in floppy plushies. This is the type of stuffing used in Squishmallow plushies. You can see how soft and wispy it is compared to polyfill. It will help the plush bend more easily where it needs to because it doesn't clump as much as normal polyfill. The downside to this is that it's hard to find and it's expensive since you need to order it from overseas. You can buy it from Hopen Textiles on AliExpress or Daiso, but Daiso often sells out of it. You can check the description for links to these products. You could also harvest the stuffing from Squishmallows, but this can get expensive since you'll probably need to buy a few of them. You can also just use normal polyfill, but for the most amount of flop, MOCHI stuffing is best. I also still use polyfill to stuff parts that don't need to flop like the head. The third step is to stuff the plush properly. The first thing to do is to fill the end of your limbs with your weighted material. Again, I'm using poly pellets. You could make little pouches of pellets if you prefer, but I just put the pellets directly into the feet. You want to use a good amount of them so there is enough weight at the end to encourage movement in the plush. I pretty much fill the entire paw with poly pellets. I also like to weight the end of the tail. I do not weight the head, as I stuff it firmly with normal polyfill to bring out the round shape, and that will be heavy enough for this purpose. When stuffing your plush, the important thing is to stuff the plush lightly. Sometimes it's necessary to stuff a plush firmly to push out the shape of the pattern and to avoid wrinkles, but if you do this, your plush will not flop at all. Understuffing your plush will result in wrinkles, which is inevitable in a floppy plush made out of minky. If the wrinkles really bother you, you should consider using Luxe Cuddle Minky instead. You should understuff your plush in critical areas where it needs to bend. On my plush, I understuff around the wrist and the elbow of the limbs. I also understuff in the middle of the plush. When you do this, it will have a nice amount of bend when held in the middle. If you only want your plush to lay down and stand, you do not need to understuff the body. If you're using polyfill, you will have to understuff it more than if you're using mochi stuffing, which will result in more wrinkles. This is another reason why I love using mochi stuffing for this purpose. I can stuff it more and still have a good amount of flop. Plus, it makes the plush even softer. You can stuff your plush as normal in the head. This is usually necessary to bring out the round shape that a lot of plushies have. Test your results as you go and before sewing your plush closed. Test the movement and see what it can do. Adjust the weight of the limbs and the amount of stuffing as necessary. When you're happy with your final product, you can sew up the closure hole and call it a wrap. Enjoy your new floppy plush.